Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way. And today we have another episode where Jay Gilligan questions me about my ongoing exploration of showmanship and play. He has collated together questions that pertains to episode 3 and episode 4. This becomes kind of just a starting point for conversations, although in some of these episodes we get quite deep into the specifics of the episode. Those episodes that he's questioning me about. Today's episode goes quite far and wide, and it's I've called it active practice. As the conversation develops, you might see that is how we sort of that's where the conversation ends up. I'm not going to say all that much, apart from the fact that when we start here, we jump straight into a conversation where Jay mentions his love of and interest in the show Mystere, which is a Cirque du Soleil show in Las Vegas, the first one that opened in 1993, I think, and he tells us how somebody asks him a question about what is it, what do you love about it? Much like it reminds me of the question in Almost Famous, where the kid keeps asking the band leader, it's like going, so, Russell, what is it that you love about music? And when somebody asks that, how do you unpick it? How do you build something, tell something of something that you have invested so much time and interest in? And so that's where this episode starts. And to then mention as well that I will undertake an exploration of Mystere and of Cirque du Soleil and of what it means to really love something and to really get into it and be interested in it so much that you see it 82 times, as you've heard. You might hear in the background here that there is some rain. I'm currently living in a caravan on site for a gig, and I don't have any other studio than here, so the pattering of drops of water on the roof, I hope that will just add to the atmosphere. And the only other message that I would like to give you before we open is that if you haven't already, a lot of you have, but if you haven't already, wherever you get your podcasts from, click follow on there so that the episodes will come down to your device, even just a message that something new has arrived. Because over the next bit of time, I will be releasing episodes sometimes bi-weekly, as it always is, but quite a few of them over the next bit will also be on the single weeks in between. And I would love it if you got a message on your phone saying a new episode has dropped and that you checked it out. Helps me. And maybe find me on Instagram on The Way of the Showman on Instagram. And here we go. People are sending in messages already. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump into today's excellent and wide-spanning conversation with Jay Gilligan.
This guy asked me at dinner, he's like, haven't you seen Mystere a bunch of times? I was like, yeah, I've seen it 82 times. And he's just shocked, and he's like, 82 times, like, why do you watch that show so much? And I'm just like, dude, I can't just casually without an answer for you. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, of course, maybe there is an answer, like, oh, I think it's funny, or I'm in love with the main singer. You know what I mean? Like, there could be a frivolous kind of comment, but I'm like, bro, if someone sees a show 82 times, it's not a just like flippant back of the hand toss off answer in 2 seconds, and then we can start talking about the football game or something. Yeah. So I was kind of speechless. He was just like, but why do you watch it so much? And I'm just like, I don't know what to say right now that's going to satisfy your question, because the real answer is like fucking hours long.
Yeah. And I think that too is, I was hanging out in Vegas a lot now with lots of people, and every now and then the conversation afforded me the possibility of talking about showmanship like I do on this podcast, because people had talked to Mike Cavaney and he asked me some pretty specific and direct questions, and and we ended up talking about a few things. But in general, I sometimes find it hard to kind of approach the topics that you and me talk about and that I talk about on this podcast. And in part of it is because they are so big. The fact that I have these 30 episodes now where I'm going to talk about what, because one interesting point is, so I understand this thing, when you've thought about something so extensively, it's hard to know where to pick and to say something specifically, because as soon as you pull on one thread, it seems to be connected to everything else. So it's hard to say something, because you kind of need to, every time I say any statement, I need to make a bunch of qualifiers.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, me and you, I could maybe explain to you why I watched Mystere so many times, pretty easily.
But like this guy who I just met at a bar or whatever, he just has no context.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh, that sounds wacky to see a show that many times. And I'm like, well, okay, where to start? Like, settle in.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And what I am attempting to do then with this whole season of Showmanship is Play, which is basically like the macrocosmos of the microcosmos of episode 96 and 98, which is looking at, which is about looking through the lens of showmanship and looking at things metaphorically to see how they are the same and how they differ or whatever. And that is what this whole season is about. It's one big metaphor that showmanship is play, and that this has to be talked about now before we talk about the shaman as a proto-showman, of like our role in relation to human beings. Before we talk about the things that they do, I think that I had to do this season here, and I talk about it in the episode after that. It's an episode 101 maybe or something, when I talk about connect and play, that I wanted to write about play back on my blog on the United Showman, but it just grew bigger and bigger, and I seemed for it to be more foundational. And that's now like 11 or 12 years ago since I stopped writing there, because I stopped pretty much the year that my daughter was born. Didn't have enough time. And then in that time, I have been doing the main part of the reading for what is this season here now. And the struggle is then to be able to, in this season, to relate it all to you, to our fellow travelers or whatever, and to you now. Like, how do I lay it out? And sometimes then it takes these 2 episodes just to look at this lens of it and what the whole project is. And that's where the cell biology and the geometry, how showmanship is geometry, you use those as pictures to go and as mini versions of the whole thing. So in a sense, I'm kind of going, well, I'm talking for 2 whole episodes about this, but that is what the whole season is. But you have to kind of, and I feel sometimes that my messages can be summed up in a couple of words, so it seems very simplistic, because maybe the whole message is showmanship is play. But that doesn't mean anything because it contains so much. So when you then unpack something like that, it takes the 30 episodes to do it, and now these commentary episodes with you to kind of get to it. Because even if I listen back to it, to the episodes, I still find that, I should actually express this like this. This would be a better way to express this. So it's this constant thing, and maybe Mystere will be a similar kind of thing about the to understand stuff. And I would imagine that also that then becomes a lens through which you see a whole bunch of other performances and performance in itself. Because I keep going back to showmanship being the lens. It's like these 2 things. It's like we talk about on a podcast. It's we view the world through the lens of showmanship. So then showmanship being the lens, what does that actually mean? That's the thing which I view it through, what showmanship is, and then it's how to look through it. And it's possible then for you to look at performance and showmanship through the lens of Mystere, which we're gonna explore this season. So I might not talk more about that now, but.
But I mean, it's the other thing. I don't know if
you ever heard the story from Eric, but it's the thing I think of all the time, which is he wanted to write a book about the history of juggling. This is 10, 20 years ago, Then he sits down to write the first page, and he's just like, oh, before I talk about the history of juggling, I should maybe say what juggling is.
Yeah.
And then he starts the first sentence of the book, juggling is, and then he's done writing the book because like he can't say what juggling is.
And he just has
like
that out, and now
yeah.
he's deep into a PhD.
Exactly.
In 20 years later.
Yeah. So
he still hasn't written the history book, but he's doing pretty good on that first sentence.
Yeah. That's it. It's like, so now he's sort of pretty much has that now. Like he's going to finish his PhD, and then he'll finish that sentence, and then he writes what that is, and then he's going to write the next sentence, which might take.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, but it's a nice moment, right? That you think you're doing something else, but we just take for granted
what this thing is, and then when you actually sit down and have to tell someone what it is, it's like, oh, actually, what
And it's this question, because I'm doing a rewrite of what season 2 was about, understanding what showmanship is, which is basically what I have recapped in 96 and 98, and I keep coming back to this quote that Augustine was asked what time was. And when they said, what is time, Augustine? And he says, well, I know what it is, but when you ask, I don't.
Right.
Everybody, we know what it is. Play, we know what it is. But then when you actually ask and you need to define it, I also think that it's a peculiar thing when you start of going like, juggling is, and that thing is like going, humanity is, or nature is, or life is. It seems like you just got to say that and then move on and say the things you're going to do. But then you get into epistemology, like what can we actually know? You get into ontology, what is the actual nature of something? So as soon as you say juggling is, you have dug yourself into the deepest trenches of philosophy. And it seems so simple, but when you actually take that seriously, which Eric Aubrey does, then you are left 10 years later, or me with no comparison to the undertaking that he does in doing a PhD, but doing this project of reading and talking about play. It's like, oh, okay, now I've finished with this blog post in quotation marks that I was going to do back in 2011 or whatever.
I mean, that's a really
good introduction actually into.
I took a few notes
on episode 96 that really stuck out to me. The first one pretty much gets away from the scope of your season about showmanship and play, and I think it goes deeper into just like everyday life and you as an artist and as a performer and a showman and a human being. And it also really connects to what we talked about before, kind of your method of how you
make work, but also
just view the world. And so
I would love to, I'm just going to read this little
quote I wrote down from what you said. And then I wanted to ask you, I have a question about it. So you said, I'm always seeking to find connections and relations and ways to map one thing to another.
And this thing of mapping
one thing to another, and that you say you're always seeking to find these connections and relations.
That's one thing that
again, we talked about this in depth before, but it's like you're reading a book, you'll make a note of it, you'll put a Post-it note or you'll make a mark, and then you'll move on to something else. But then maybe 2 years later you go, oh yeah, but I did read a book about that. You'll keep kind of these things in your universe that you can connect to each other later on.
And I had a couple of questions
about that. The first one is,
does it ever get exhausting?
Does it exhaust you? Does your process exhaust you? This kind of constant seeking to find connections. Does it ever get
heavy for you?
Does it ever get overwhelming?
Because I know my personal
process sometimes really
it overwhelms me. Like
it does. I exhaust myself. Eric and I were talking about this the other day, that the way we make juggling is we iterate it and we have to find every single variation, and then we'll pick the two that we think are the ones or whatever to share with an audience, right? And just this idea that we have to find every variation before we can find those two is something I've been trying to like in general, it's a great process because I prefer forward movement in a process as opposed to doubt and self-doubt and stagnation, kind of going in spirals, with questioning yourself. Oh, here's a variation I found, but is it the one? Is there a better variation out there? And it kind of eats at the back of your head a little bit. And so I prefer just this forward momentum of like, yeah, maybe it's exhausting to find all the variations. It's going to take weeks or months, but that process is still shorter than sitting in a room agonizing over if I made the right decision or not, because I didn't put in the work, or, I didn't uncover all the stones or turn over all the rocks or whatever metaphor, right? And so I've been trying to liberate myself from that process a little bit and just be like, what is the function at this moment of the show? I don't need to find every single variation of this trick. I just need one that works. And I really remember that too when we were working on the reflex show together. And it was like I had this epiphany from working with you that was like, at one point I was like, oh man, we have to make this show good. And there's like one good way to do the show. And then I realized at one point I was like, oh, there's an infinite number of good versions of this show. There's also an infinite number of bad versions of this show. And we just have to pick one good version of this show, right? And that it's not that if we make a different choice, it's going to stop being good potentially. Mm. And so I've been trying to get away from exhausting myself with my process. But I just wanted to, I really related in this quote: "You're always seeking to find connections and ways to map one thing to another." And my first question is about like how your process works for you on a sustainability, in terms of being sustainable.
I think it's a great question, and it's something that's so intriguing about you as well, and which is so visible in your work. We just had a very long conversation about what keeps and captures people's interest whilst watching juggling when it's mainly sort of abstract things going on, and the difference between the tricks for kids, passing video where it's just literally here's possibilities you can do, and it's not crafted together. And then the next day you posted from Apparat, you and Eric Aubrey doing the magnet clubs, which we delved into quite a bit in Reflex. And that act just did all those things that had come out through that initial conversation. The first one, which is just here's a thing, and at some point when it's just a random, here's something else, you can just stop at any time. But I watched the whole of the Magnet Club act because it is so carefully and deliberately crafted, and it keeps developing in a way that I don't know why it is so compelling, but I'm sure that the agonizing decision making from that whole process, that although it's just a 4-minute thing, that might be a 4-month process that led to that. And that's somehow visible in that the choices taken in each exploration of the moves are so carefully considered that it makes sense, almost like a sentence spoken, that you want to see what the end is. Where is this going? And usually if you keep just juggling and juggling, at some point you lose interest. It's like music. If it's just tones going, at some point you start thinking about something else. If it's just abstract music for Airports by Brian Eno, it's meant to be in the background whilst you're doing something else. And when you put those things together, I get the feeling like I am watching a rich and well-developed piece of music with enough melodies and enough repetition and enough newness in it so that I continue to watch it. And that's just, all of that is just to say that your method is fully working. It's so visible just from these two examples of seeing you doing a list of stuff to doing a well-developed routine. So it's totally working, and exhausting as it might be. And I think also to myself that is my process exhausting? And in a sense, if it's anything, this process that's going on the way of a showman, where I'm sharing all my thoughts, it's exhaustive because I keep connecting it to everything. So I would like, so like I'm doing the book on the nature of understanding what showmanship is, and now we're doing how did it originate, and I think it's in play, and then we're going to look at the shaman as a proto showman and all the different cultural direct sort of uses of showmanship in the next season or whatever, whenever that would then be. So it feels like it's complex because I have so many ideas about it, and sometimes it's kind of exhausting, but it's also, when I come back from America and I've had a very full life and I get back here and I have more time on my hands, I can get stuck on scrolling through social media or listening to lectures or whatever it is I'm listening to on YouTube and procrastinating. But then as soon as I sit down and actually start writing, start working on something, pick up something, even, go and fix some of the things that need to be fixed around the house because I've been away for 2 months, 9 weeks, then I start to feel more at ease. Like if I'm not doing something, I start to feel lost. So in that way, it's both exhausting, but it's also the thing that when I then put my mind into it, my mind thrives and I feel like I'm doing something meaningful, or at least it's like I'm not thinking, what am I doing with my life, or I feel lost or whatever. So within it, I sometimes dread it because, I have a very big project ahead when I'm doing this rewrite now of 130,000 words, and I'm trying to put it into this new structure, and every now and then I get overwhelmed by it. But then when you're actually just working on crafting each sentence, it feels really fulfilling. And this, like, just one more thing, that it's basically this thing that we spoke about in, was it the first episode? I don't know, it was the second of the episodes that you and me were talking. So the last time we spoke about this, where you're talking about the moral component of paying attention. That I do think that the way that we pay attention changes what we do. And that's partly what I want to do. Take this thing that I care about so much, performing, doing tricks for people, tricks for the kids, and put it into the context or the sphere of the level of thinking, which is what I actually consume through my books or through my watching on YouTube, watching lectures and stuff. I like to think of these greater ideas. And I think that the context that you see something in, it changes whatever it is that you're looking at. So the context of anything changes what that thing is. And that's kind of my goal, is to change the context of showmanship, and I'm like connecting and playfully expanding, to use these words, like expand a new, richer and more kind of deeper understanding of by connecting it to all these different things, I get a better understanding of what it is, and I am seeing it in a different way that takes it out of the everyday thing of how do I get gigs, or do I do this throw before the other throw in my juggling routine. And for me personally, this is what I need in my life, and this is the book that I would have liked to read. And it's so, and this is the conversation that I would like to have, and that I, through metaphorical thinking, when I'm listening to a talk on whatever, medicine or some aspect of biology, I listen to it as if they are metaphorically speaking about showmanship, always. So that's the overall project, and that gives me great, immediate, in-the-moment excitement and enthusiasm, and I keep having to stop and just take a note. So
yeah, I mean, okay, great. So
you totally answered the question there. I mean, I think for me, the key point was, you said too, or one of the key points was this idea that, like, when I'm not looking for these connections, I'm lost. And it is in the seeking and the curiosity, right, that's kind of guiding you forward through whatever process or life or, whatever level. We don't have to care, but I thought that was really cool. I just wanted to say a couple of comments before the next little note I took here on the episode. But basically, I think the way I deal with my own process being exhausting or whatever is you always just have to respect your resources. It's always tempered by your time, your money, your budget, your enthusiasm, your passion, your energy, your health, right?
Yeah. Totally.
And so it's like, yeah, that Magnet Club duet with Eric's a perfect example. You're totally right. It took about 4 months to put together. So did I find every single permutation of 5 clubs in 4 hands? No. But did I find every, variation within 4 months time span as alongside making the whole rest of that show? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I did my best with my resources. I think of that a lot when the kids in the circus school have an assignment in class from me. And I say, okay, you have, 6 minutes to do X, Y, and Z. And some of the kids get done in 4 minutes. And I'm like, hey, I get it. This is really seemingly trivial, but you got 2 more minutes to work. Like, and 2 minutes here in this microcosm of the classroom, if we extrapolate that to the real world, that could be another 2 months to, you know what I mean? Like to make a show. And it's tough. It's a new idea. The assignment's probably really obtuse. It's probably really interpretive. And there's no guidelines. It's all very personal. There's no right or wrong. And how do you maximize your resources? I get it. If somebody asked me to make something in 6 minutes with some weird idea, I also might get done in 4 minutes or 3 minutes or 1 minute, And then I say, well, what's the point? I just have 2 minutes left. And it's so hard to maximize it or optimize, let's say, your resources. That's just a little point. And so I think about that a lot too with your process about always seeking to find connection and mapping one thing to another, that like you do it within the limits of reality. You're not obsessive, compulsive to the point of it being it might tire you at times, but I don't see you scribbling notes on the bathroom wall when you're taking a shower necessarily, right? There's some sort of a limit there.
I had to make a pause, and I was listening to a lecture whilst in the shower today, and I had to pause. And what did I wrote something down. Anyway.
No, but so then the other question, which you already answered about this finding connections, I was just going to say simply why find connections? Like what, and not necessarily for you personally, like I think you answered that very well, but just in general, like what is this thing about finding connections or relationships between and mapping one thing to another, like in the broader picture? But I think you already answered that really clearly as well. Specifically, you said, you're trying to find a context for these things that you want to present, and connecting these things, you're making a new context, or you're bringing them into a certain specific context.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great motivation.
It's both a context of, it's like, how does it relate to the philosophical things? When you truly ask, what is showmanship? What is the nature of it? And in the process of answering that as the showman and the audience and the show and what the show is, I have connected it deeply to a tradition of philosophical thinking that is like Henri Bergson and Martin Heidegger and process philosophy in general. So now I'm this aspect that I've just discovered in the last 5 years or so, the part of philosophy history which was not covered, what in America is called continental philosophy, but what is kind of process philosophy here in Europe, a lot of it is, and John Dewey in America, I'm drawing from that whole thing, and I didn't quite know that. But once I had articulated my own, then I found Hans-Georg Gadamer first. He was the first philosopher that I found that talked in these ways about relational philosophy or whatever. And then I discovered Bergson, and then I discovered Heidegger and John Dewey. And through reading them, then I go this weird abstract level of stuff, and to a small degree, Whitehead as well. Like in a tiny way, what I have sort of uncovered, these guys have already written monographs about. But the fact that I picked that out and believed that to be the nature of what I do, all of a sudden, in a very, because I was a Johnny come lately and pulled that out of thin air or whatever when I was trying, and it all came from that image of one facing the other way, trying to find a definition in writing a poem thing of going, a showman is somebody who faces the other way, and then just questioning that, going, who is it that faces the other way? What does it mean to face the other way? Who is looking at me? What's going on? And in those relationships, everything came on. I could unpack everything, much like Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, and then he unwound a whole philosophy for whatever mistakes he made along that path, but I'm making mistakes in mine. But I then found a greater context to what I was doing, and it allows me to speak with deep conviction and deep threads of depth and meaning, of people who have thought about what art is, have thought about what it means to be human, and what relations mean. So when I describe my act where I make an invisible egg real and a child turns it into a chocolate egg, I can speak about that with this context that, these are the 10,000 things, as the Buddhists call it, of the egg, and invisible, and about, is it actually real or is it not? And the child believed, and they get rewarded with the chocolate egg with a surprise inside. But when I'm doing that act, and when the things that I say and intimate makes also the adults, at least, feel that there's something more going on here. It's not just a frivolous act of these subtle things that comes out through my literal jokes of, this is an egg, an invisible egg that I borrowed from a chicken that has had a phantom pregnancy. It is a joke, and it's really base and simple, but it also comes from this sort of mystery and blah blah blah. So I think it has a direct relation to my work. Placing it in that greater context, it just informs how I approach my acts.
That's great. I mean, let's move on
from this one, but just to say, I just want to put a point here and say that I think this statement of, I seek to find connections and relations and ways to map one thing to another. Like, I have always been saying for 20 years now that the role of an artist is to be an editor, kind of in today's world, and we don't need to get into that now, but like, I feel like many times my job is to be an editor. My job as an artist is to have an opinion. Honestly, like, I'm paid to have an opinion. That's like my actual job, is to have an opinion about things, a point of view. We talked about that before too, having a point of view. And so this statement from you, this idea of finding connections between things, maybe that's another way you could look at it as being an artist. And I think I just like to point these things out for myself, because growing up, for me, being an artist was very mysterious. It was very potentially pretentious. I'm from a small farm in Ohio, and like, I didn't meet many artists, let's say, self-proclaimed artists at least. And when people would talk about being an artist, that always sounded like a very nebulous, kind of undefined, thing that, like, what does that even mean? And again, thinking back to these kids in circus schools, in my juggling class, for example, and we're talking about them being artists, or, hey, you're in a circus school, and the circus school says you're training to be an artist, you're learning how to be an artist. Like, what does that even mean? Well, here's one suggestion of what that means. Maybe it just means that you're a person, and part of your process is finding connections between things. And I think that could be a nice guiding light if you're lost, or if you're confused, or if you're, so.
Even just like, because it's a connection between things, but to bring it right back to where I feel like this is the ontology of what showmanship is for you to make some kind of relation and connection to your audience. You are there, and if you're just standing there alone and doing your juggling, and it doesn't matter if you stand facing them or you face the other way or you're alone in a room, then maybe there isn't quite enough of a connection. Then if it's on the street, they look at it a little bit going, that's amazing, and I walk on. It's just a string of tricks unrelated, and I have no reason to want to watch the end of it. So it's like, truly, yeah, seeing the connections and everything. And I just thought one thing about you saying you look at all the different possibilities in your Magnet Club routine, but maybe there was more. Maybe there was thousands more. But this is the difference between, I thought of, when computers are trying to work out how to play chess. They go literally through 1,500,000 possibilities and check them. But 98% of those, the grandmaster at chess don't look at, because they immediately see that these are not relevant. So this ability to what John Vervaeke calls relevance realization, which is something we do all the way through our life. You immediately, most things are not relevant to me, so I just go by the wayside. But for you, it's also to go through only the variations that are valuable, because maybe a whole bunch of the variations of the club would be, should I flip it this way, or should I flip it the other way? Or should I flip club A, B, or C? But since they're white, and since that doesn't actually matter. Like, each could be substituted. Should I try to do it same pattern, but with the 3 different clubs? No. That's already out there. But in the brute force of a computer checking all the things, it would do all of those. And then you end up with an insurmountable amount of data points for you to look through, and you can't actually do it. So you are using your expert ability to form an opinion as somebody who has juggled their whole life. You already take whole domains of permutations of the possibilities of the magnet clubs, but that's through you being a grandmaster juggler, grandmaster chess player. So anyway,
I mean, that's also why the future
of the internet is curation, right? Because we just have a deluge of information, and the most valuable thing in the future is going to be the curation of what information is relevant. But we don't need to jump into that necessarily. But one thing you said was this idea that connecting things, and you drill it down to being concrete. So I loved it. Let's be concrete for a second, which will bring up the second note I have on episode 96. But yeah, like you said, it's maybe just as simple as connecting when you're performing for an audience. Like, are you standing facing the right direction so that the visual is being communicated the best way, or whatever, the preferred way? Again, going back to if I look around the circus world right now, the trend in the past few years is to find these kind of hot topics, these social topics. Let's say environmentalism or environmental awareness, right? Global warming or something. And now, hey, we're going to do a circus show. And I think that is where the whole system so far, for me, has fallen down many times, is that, hey, I'm doing a handstand, and I just haven't dug deep enough for that connection to global warming. And I truly believe you can. If you're passionate about both things, the only thing in common doesn't need to be just yourself, that you had those two thoughts next to each other, like, oh, I do handstand and I'm into saving the environment. Okay, what does one have to do with the other? Well, me. I'm the common nexus there in that equation, because I like both of those things.
Point.
And that's normally where the relationship stops, I have to say, at least what I've seen personally in a lot of these performances. But this idea of like
finding the relationships
and mapping one thing onto the other, I 110% believe is possible. I think you can do handstands about global warming. I just haven't seen it yet. I would imagine it's really hard to do, but I think conceptually this idea of finding connections and digging deeper and finding these relations and mapping one thing to the other, I think that's the way to go. And so here's the next little note I have, and that's a little segue into this next thing I have to say. Let's keep the image of the handstand and the saving the planet, okay? And this is a little quote then that I'll ask you a question about in relationship to handstanding on the planet. It says, but connecting one thing with another, this is a little bit of AI bad grammar here, so stick with me. The other thing which I then happen to connect I happen to connect things to at least, that makes no sense. This is usually some aspect of showmanship. I believe a metaphor like this way of looking at things is kind of, you're saying that the metaphor is a living thing, but here's the point. Here's the really important thing. Then you said the metaphor is actually a way to access into reality.
Yes.
That the metaphor is that path into reality. And this really, I really wanted to ask you about this because this really stuck out to me. And without getting into philosophy and stuff so much, or at least for me, you can get into as deep as you want. I don't know anything formally about philosophy. I know a little bit.
Yeah, me neither. I talk a lot about it, but I don't have any degree.
But just this idea that a metaphor is in some way a construction that's not true. It's not real, right? Like we're just creating a metaphor.
Yeah.
That's why it's called a metaphor, because it's not actually that thing. We're drawing this kind of thought bridge, if you will, between two things or whatever, right? But that having that sort of, not concrete, not real thing is the way into things that are real. I don't know. That really kind of blew my mind when you said that. It was really stuck out to me. I was like, oh, that's weird. That actually maybe the metaphor is the way we have to, like, it's the only way we can access reality, perhaps.
Yeah.
That was pretty hardcore, I thought. So what's up with that?
Yeah.
And then to join that with this idea of like, I'm going to handstand to save the planet or bring awareness. To give the benefit of the doubt, to bring awareness to global warming, it's like, okay, we have a metaphor here. The metaphor is handstand and the steam. And the reality is the planet's in trouble, and I'm communicating with my audience, right? There's just so many, I don't know. Yeah. So that also brought to my mind this idea of like metaphor connecting into reality.
Yeah.
And like, when does it actually connect into reality? And when does it just stay as a thought experiment that's kind of academic as opposed to like maybe like emotional or. Okay, sorry. I'll let you. That was a bunch of random stuff to throw at you.
Oh, no, that makes a whole lot of sense. And when I first encountered this, because I've always, when I was 17 or whatever, and I wrote a book-length project about the Scandinavian myths, the Norse mythology. My question was, how could my ancestors base their life and philosophy and the questions they had about existence, how could they base that on these gods who are, by our standards, silly, fallible, and just very human? How could they base it on that? And then, so that was then a deep exploration of myths, and through different paths, I tried to access it. So this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. But I didn't have the language. And then it was through watching John Vervaeke's series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, a 50-hour lecture series by an incredible professor from Toronto University, where one of the things that he talks about in a couple of the episodes or whatever is this book by these two guys, Lakof and Johnston, who wrote a book, Metaphors to Live By. And they are making the argument there that it is metaphor or poetic ways of looking at the world, where we see that one thing is like another one. Not exactly, but it's to be able to see those key features of how saving the planet or living sustainably and doing a handstand, to see these two things as related. A lot of it is not the same, but some things might be the same.
Yeah.
And if you understand handstands, this can be your lens towards understanding many other things. The delicate balance of you go too far one way or too far the other way, and how. Anyway, but they are talking about much more foundational things. in their
Right.
book, Metaphors to Live By, and then in Philosophy in the Flesh, which is a more a formal philosophical outline of this argument. And there they're basically going, it's like metaphors is the key function that allows you to understand anything. The fact that you have a body that has, as I say in this episode, up and down and back and front, it's like, oh, I've left these very physical, simple things allows you to grasp and learn something about the world, learn something about the nature of time. Then you places the past behind you and the future ahead of you. Not all societies do that. There are people who navigate time differently from right to left and all this sort of stuff. And they basically go that being able to see one thing as something else is how you understand new things. So they go, metaphors is the key to thinking. And to me then, metaphor, being able to take one thing and pretend, lie, all this is in quotation marks, or play, underline that one, play that this thing here, this little pine cone with sticks in it, is a little animal. This thing allows you to access reality through it. You're now playing that animal, and in your mind, you are now you're seeing the world from that perspective, and you're changing it. So to me, then, this metaphor and play and all that is again at the heart of the human process. So in that way, that's kind of what I mean when I to say that it's through metaphor that we access reality. Because the way that we access reality also, which we continuously think, and we do it through, when we want to know what something is, then we look through a microscope, or you divide everything up into, and you understand a smaller and smaller part. But reality is never a part that you can understand, because that thing is connected to all the other things. We can understand how the fingers of my hand work exactly by looking into which tendon goes where and what or whatever. And you can look into the brain, and you see when you fall in love, it lights up this area of the brain. So all love is a bunch of activities in this thing here, but that isn't what love is. Love is all of the stuff that Shakespeare wrote. It's all the stuff that you have felt and I have felt in an encounter with another human being, or as I talked about in the previous last episode here, 103, where I talk about my dog. It's like, I love this dog. I come home from America and I love this dog for all those things. And it's a very specific emotion and everything. And to say that it is the electrical impulses in a certain part of my brain is true from a very limited point of view, but it's actually much more complicated than that. It's the connection of everything. And that comes back to this thing that I say as a mantra. Reality is always more than one thing. I say that it's this thing, and that reveals a truth, which is 100% truth. But in that revelation of that, what that is, you are casting shadow on all these other things that it could be, or that it also is at the same time, which is why metaphor can carry us across into a real relationship with the world. And this, I believe, is an imaginative process, and that's how we relate to the world. So, I think that's the nature of how we human beings relate to the world. It is imagination, in actually imagining ourselves into it. Yeah.
That's a perfect spot,
though, to go to this next note, which extends from exactly where you are now. So I think we should just jump into it, because it follows on exactly from what your train of thought there. I thought this was a really powerful quote
from the episode.
In a good metaphor that likens what we don't understand or don't yet know with something that we do know. That's when we can get a sudden understanding, when we spot the similarities through all the dissimilarities. There's this idea that a metaphor, like, that's how you can start to understand something that you don't know. You go, oh, what's this new thing? I don't know what it is. I never seen it before. I have no idea. Wait a second. That little part of it over there looks like this thing that I do already know.
Yes.
And then you have a little entry point into that.
So I wondered if you could,
Why-
which is exactly what you started to say now. Can
But
you
that's why
expand
they
upon
call
that
it-
process a little bit? Or
Yeah. Sorry. No. I was just going to say that's why Lakof and Johnston pulls it back to the body, and that's why they call it philosophy in the flesh. It's like it goes back as far as you go. What do I understand about time? Nothing, but I understand my body, and this is how it is. And then you start to get a sense of it. But that sense that we have of time, which is why our Augustine says, "I know, but when you ask me what time is, I don't know what it is." It's because of that, because I have a relationship to the time, but I don't know what it is in itself. I can't put the pin in it and say, this is exactly what it is, because it continues to be relational, and it then goes back to ourselves in our bodies. So there is where I think there is, I don't know quite yet what it is, but where handstand can go into the relationship we have to the world, or what, like, that there is something in there, because handstands are so physical, possibly at least arguably more so than juggling. I mean, juggling is also 100% physical, but there's objects as well. When you're doing handstands and those kinds of things, as opposed, it's not even flips. It's like just a body in space, and that is, you can't get more fundamental than that. But now
the body is the object. You know, it's not juggling with an object. The body is the object that's being juggled. You know.
Yeah, that's right. And but you're dealing with gravity, but the object is, so it's similar to juggling in that way, but it's minus object manipulation, because the object is the most primal one that you can have.
Right.
Sorry.
But do you have any sort of techniques then, or like conscious processes when you? Because I really like this idea that the metaphor, it is that it's kind of a tool, or it's a technique or whatever. That if I find something I don't know about it, I can, through metaphor, I can start to understand what the new thing is. Do you have any sort of personal, like, you don't have to, but do you have any sort of personal process or way that you can articulate that you notice that you do that on purpose? Like just for example, like, let's say you encounter something new and you don't know anything about it. Like, do you have a generalization of where you would start or how you would start to uncover the new thing? I'm just trying to think, like, for me, I always try to boil it down to, like, Eric and I, we often try to boil things down to their basic components, right? So if you find, this is very easy, right? You find something that's very complex and you start to break it down into just smaller components, right? That's nothing crazy or revolutionary or new, but it's very straightforward. You go, this thing has 10 layers that I can recognize, just from observing it. And together, all those layers, I can't understand what's happening. But if I start to deconstruct those different layers, maybe one by one, I can start to learn. So do you have any sort of method that you consciously articulate to yourself or think about when you're doing that process?
It has. I'm always looking for patterns, I think, in a way. Like, recently I have been dealing with this die box thing, magic trick where you put the die inside and then you close the doors and you slide the die inside and the audience thinks that they know where it is. And this is what magic is called, the sucker effect, because you sucker the audience into tricking them that something is not true.
Yeah.
Which I dislike. I don't like that thing, because I don't ever in my performances, which you might have noticed or whatever, I don't ever go, I am better than you, in a way. And we explored it in Reflex in your show by you basically said that line, I think, is going, because why is this happening? Because I'm better than you. I can throw one more up here or whatever. So we wanted that because we wanted them to, we used it polemically to make them shout and then to get them to experience what it is when they actually won and took you down a peg, and how we now are, we broke the performance. So we did it rhetorically or whatever. But I don't like that use of I'm better than you. So I'm reframing it and I'm going like, there are magic. But that's the pattern of this thing, that the audience, and for me, they're going to go, the appearance of what's going on in this trick is that it's really easy to work out what's going on. It's that it's a dumb trick. Isn't, but what's happening when I tilt the die box to the side and I open the door in the top end, everybody knows it just slid down on the other side. It's out of view. And then there's all the games that come with that. So in there, I'm then looking at this, I'm going, there is something in here, and I don't know what it is, but there is a relationship to this thing of not knowing, or of the mistake of thinking that something was easy, but it turned out that it was hard, that it was actually mysterious. And I reframed the thing of going, I will show you this trick and I will trick you. I put the die in here, now it's gone. And I tilt it back and forth, and the kids are shouting and they think you're stupid. And then in the end you go, ha, it wasn't, it was over there all the time. That's the normal. But so I say, and I'm just still working on this, which is why it's so in my head. That's why it's standing right there. I say, there are some tricks that are easy to understand. Some tricks are just dumb, that magicians do. But some tricks are so impossible and so difficult to understand that not even magicians understand them. And I'd like to show you one of these now. And then I go, because when we look at some things, we think that they're easy to understand, that we have the measure of them. But then, as it turns out, it might actually be a lot more magical than we first thought. So here I have a die, here I have a box, and here I have a hat. Or here's a hat with a box with a die in it, and I put the die into the box, blah, 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 back and forth. And then they keep thinking that they have the measure of it. And I use that language of going, yeah, you think you understand, and I think we understand. Yeah, it's over there. Oh, and I tilt it and I do all those things. And then in the end, I call it the box, I call a mystery cabinet, or a riddle cabinet, actually, gåteskap. And when we then in the end, they finally go, we want to open all 4 doors and see and deflate this mystery. I open all the doors, and it is actually gone. And now we are all in this sort of question going, what is it that happens here? Like, because now, how do I turn this so it's not a negative thing? And I didn't trick them. And I'm going, because I've already said the magician, some things that not even magicians understand. And I'm going, because when we are, and as I'm closing the 4 doors again, closing the doors, I go, at this point, it's like we are lost. Like, we don't know what's going on. And when we are lost, if we're lost in a forest, we have a tendency to walk in a circle. So perhaps it's not so strange now that we find ourselves back where we started, with an empty box of mystery, a magic wand, and a very large die inside the hat. And then I put the die back in the box and we close it, and that's the end of it. So with the way that's kind of been set up in this circle now, it's like I'm telling them that they will think that they know. I think it's going to be easy and whatever. But then when you really look into it and we actually open all the doors, then it was actually mysterious, but I'm with them. So I don't know if that's because I was just trying to do something, because I have a tendency to be very abstract. But
no, it's good. No, it's good. And like you said, trying to find these patterns and
looking for a pattern that exists in the routine.
Exactly.
In that trick. And then I look for a way to frame that in a way that is not antagonizing. It's not a competition, but I want to have all that game, because the game of them thinking that I'm stupid or fooling them in a stupid way is so fun. And we all love it. But then when it gets to the end, I want them to think of what I said in the beginning, that sometimes things are much more mysterious when you, so to reframe it like that changes this literally off-the-shelf magic trick that you can buy in a shop and do later that day.
No, it's great I mean, you know me, I love being concrete. And normally all my questions here are more conceptual and abstract. The next thing I have for you is actually super concrete. It's very practical. Yeah. So maybe since you're being concrete, it's good to keep that feeling going for a second. It's a really dumb question, or it's like kind of meaningless, but I'm so fascinated by the whole thing. So you said, this is just a little quote. It's out of context, but you'll get it. You say, I called it active reading. And by this, I meant active in the way that I'm not just passively receiving what's in the book. I'm actually reading. I'm actually reading as I read it. I'm trying to connect it to myself. This goes back to everything we've said today about connecting and everything. My question is very practical. This term active reading, because you say I called it active reading. Is that kind of your term that you came up with, or is that something you've adapted from somewhere else? And in the way that Ivar Heckscher, he got into embroidery in his later years. He's still embroidering away, I'm sure, as we speak. And he made up this style of embroidery called clean embroidery. But clean embroidery, it expands to anything. You can do clean anything. You can do clean dishwashing, but you can do clean juggling. You can do clean magic. You can do clean whatever. It's just it's an aesthetic kind of philosophy, or it's a way to present something. And I think he just as a side note, I think he uses the word clean as well as the word pure. So it's pure, it's clean embroidery. It's pure. It's not embroidery plus some bells and whistles of, painting. He doesn't embroider and then also paint the canvas and paint the yarn, but he's doing clean whatever. And so, so my question very, very pedantically in one way is, did you come up with the name active, like for active reading? And also, can then this term active, obviously it's a way to consume information or sensation or experiences, but like, can we extrapolate that name to different sorts of obviously you have an active process. I don't know, I was just trying to think, like, do you use that word in different ways to yourself? Maybe it's a completely stupid question, but what do you think?
I think active reading, nothing is new under the sun, so it's probably appeared somewhere, but
you can't specifically pinpoint right now, like, oh, I got that from so and so.
No, I did not get it from anywhere specifically like that, but in my mind, where that came from and why I said I used to call it or whatever, is that it came up in the last or the third one of our Helsinki conversations.
Yes.
You asked me about the process.
About your process.
Yeah. And then this came out, and some of those things, and the reason why I am revisiting it here is because you asked me about my process, and that thing about active reading came out through that conversation. And I talk in this episode about these two episodes, 96 and 98, which we probably will have to do 98 as a separate thing, I see. But it's in part inspired by you drawing this thing out. As before, I can talk about these two episodes here. They are in here because before we can look at showmanship as play, or before we can look at it as showmanship as a triangle and what we learn from that, we need to look at what is the actual process of understanding this. And so I think I'm probably not the first one to say active reading, but the way that I think of it is idiosyncratic to me. And I
know we've talked about your process at length and connecting everything up, and you're always trying to find these connections. That's what the whole conversation today has been about. But do you use that word active in any other way of your process, like consciously? Or you're like, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, actively take notes now, or I'm going to actively stretch, or I'm going to actively practice this juggling trick? I don't know. Like, do you, because for me, let me just qualify the question a little bit. For me, this idea of active reading, it's a different way of paying attention, right? And like I said, you can apply this word active to kind of experiences. Like, I can actively be involved in an experience, or because we can take the opposite and say I'm a little bit more passive. And I would imagine you're not actively finding these connections or searching like 24 hours a day, because you would die. Going back to that, it's not sustainable.
When I'm eating, so it's whatever, or it's like I'm not eating actively, but you could also do that. You could sit down and have a meal, and so it's the process of doing it. If somebody has made a meal and I'm actively now trying to eat, I will connect this meal to me. Oh, you have done this. Oh, you have done that. These are the resources that you put in. You've sourced these things, and you've done, and you had me in mind. And then this becomes can be a topic of conversation or insight or whatever. But a lot of the time,
So my question is then, no, exactly. That's exactly what I mean. So then, do you have any sort of conscious sort of like structures in your life of when you switch on your activeness or when you are a bit more passive? Or do you have, is it more organic flowing on whatever project you're working on? I guess that's probably going to be the answer, right? It's more like, well, I'm working on the die box now, so I'm actively engaging in these processes. But I don't know. I wanted, because I think
so much of my life is reading and taking stuff in, or literally performing or whatever. So like those things, they will, then it's running on silent in the background.
I got you.
But
that's my question.
So there are times when I'm like, because if I'm like yesterday where I am weeding the front of our house,
yeah,
I don't have to think so much about that. So when I'm doing that, something is going on in my head. And those moments where you like to not, if I have music on or I don't have anything on, then stuff is developing in my mind or going. So there are times when I'm not actively engaged in it. Also, like you're having a mundane conversation or whatever, where we're just trying to be in the moment and not, because making connections can also, that's why I have to write down what I need to say in these 30 episodes, is so that I'm sure that I have made my point in this half hour I spoke. Now that you and me are talking, we're trying to get to one thing, but I jump off on one idea and I jump off on another idea, and then you say something and I'm just going to make a comment on something, the last thing we said, and therefore we're jumping around in topics and not always making the points. But that's also why conversations can be really nice, because you can be in it with someone and the people who are listening to it, because I like this too, to listen to conversations, and that is a feature of it. It's not just driving towards with one narration or whatever. But the key thing that I'm doing, I think, when I'm actively reading, is to read as if the person in the book has written this specifically for me, and that they're talking to me about their subject, but they're talking to me about their subject, but it is actually about my subject, my interests. And those are then the ongoing projects of my series of children's books. It's the stories that are written about the Showman's Guild and the secret society of show. There's elements that go in there. There's elements that go into the kid's story. There's elements that go into what happens on the way of the showman, which is a more intellectual pursuit of the world of ideas, of how these things relate. So when I hear something, I might not know what it is that they are talking about. And in part, I'm also interested in that, in whatever they're talking about. So this person is talking about architecture, and I'm interested in architecture as a thing in itself. But when they are talking about these things, all of a sudden something they say triggers a pattern that's related to the conversation that you and me have had about juggling. Just been watching a bunch of stuff from this talk, Cave of Apelles, it's called, and it's centered around like it's art, talking about art, and it's Odd Nerdrum who paints figuratively, and I just listened to a bunch of those conversations, and I'm imagining that they too, when they're talking about figurative art and how that especially like in the 60s, 70s, or that if you're in an art institution and you painted people looking like people, a mother grieving a dead child, they go, this is just an illustration, this is nothing, this is not art. Art is Duchamp's fountain and all that, and that was a big thing, and he painted Rembrandt-style pictures at that time, which the art institutions found very difficult to handle. And I'm like, we are like this. There's a part of what. And then my conversation now is about abstractness, concreteness, and what you and me have pursued so much over our conversations, and specifically over a week, 2 weeks ago or so, when we went back and forth a lot about it. So then I'm listening to it, and I don't know exactly how it connects to juggling being inherently abstract, but I keep getting these little glimpses of going, oh, it's connected to this. Oh, it's connected to this. Oh, like what we do needs to have So, but do I do it all the time? No, not all the time. But it is also a sort of a feature of how I interact with the world. And you can use it in conversations too. When you talk to someone about it, and you're just trying to find one bit about something that somebody does while you're standing on the soccer field, or you're there with at school or whatever. Try to find this one thing where I go, where do we have a connection? And it really is this dad that's there. He works on cars and builds these car part things that he customizes. But not through having a business, through making something for the need and use of other people or whatever. Like I get into, and all of a sudden you can have quite an interesting conversation with somebody who cares a lot about things that don't normally I care very much about.
You have to let me go on a rant right now. I have to rant about something. I have to rant about this active thing.
Okay.
Because it's, once again, Frodo, I mean, like you said, maybe you didn't come up with the term active, but you brought it into my world, and you brought it into this context of this conversation. And it kind of articulates or vocalizes something that I've been unable to put words to for my whole life. And now I think I'm going to start using the word active, for better or worse, until something else comes along. But like, here's the thing. I'm going to rant about this. Because obviously, like too, when I was learning how to juggle as a kid, we talked about this a lot. We didn't have the language, but it was like, oh, I'm going to learn 7 balls, right? I throw the 7 balls, I catch some of them, I eventually drop, probably sooner than later, right? This just goes over and over and over again. That's how you learn how to juggle. But at some point, we were like, hey, you know what? Instead of just throwing these things up in the air and letting them fall to the ground, why don't we pay attention to what's happening? And then you start to say, oh, maybe my 3rd ball, my release from my right hand's a little bit low, or it's not crossing enough, right? You start to pay attention because you're actively seeking to connect what you're doing towards a bigger goal. Exactly what you just said. So we can start to call that active practicing. And this is something we talked about as kids. And again, I don't know, I have no relationship to the larger world or the history of juggling. If this was a new thing, or this is something people were doing back from when Bobby May was around or before him, I have no idea. But I remember it was definitely a conversation no one was having in my world with my group of friends at the time. And we came up with this idea of like, oh, instead of just blindly, and we can say that as the word, as the opposite of active, and instead of just blindly throwing things up and just banging your head against the wall, brute force without any sort of reflection, every single time you throw the 7 balls, you're going to pay attention to what's happening, and you're going to correct every single time. And is that exhausting? In one way, yes, because it takes so much more mental energy to be active, to be aware. But oh my goodness, we progressed so far, so much faster once we all started being active in our practicing. And we would literally separate our attention span so that we would give ourselves, I don't even know if we had a word for that, but kind of free time at the end of the practice. Oh, so yeah. you would have your like 2-hour training session, or, probably more likely 4-hour training session. And there you were being active. You were actively reading the technique every single time you threw something in the air, physically correcting yourself. But then at the end of the session, you'd have like maybe a half hour where you could just throw stuff around mindlessly. You didn't have to be active anymore. And that was also an important part of the process, right? Maybe to curate your passion, or to, recharge your energy levels in another way. And the second part, here's the rant where I come in about active attention span or whatever. It's the same thing I've been trying to tell the kids at the circus school for years, and it never works. And it drives me crazy, but now I have a word for it. So maybe it's going to work better now. But here's the thing. You end up in a class with 3 different people, 3 other students, let's say 3 fellow students, right? And in juggling, everybody does different stuff. Somebody's doing Diablo, somebody's doing foot juggling, somebody's juggling clubs, like somebody's bouncing balls, And so it's so easy when we have a group class and we have to work individually, that everybody in the room tunes out. You just turn your brain off. You're like, oh, now they're talking about ball bouncing, but I juggle clubs. So like, this is not for me. And my whole point now I start to scream. My whole point for 20 years has been like, no, the entire reason you're in this room is because you're different. That's the only good of this whole process of being in this circus school, at least for juggling, because juggling is so different than the other disciplines. If you're going to try to juggle 7 clubs, you're most likely not going to break your neck if you make a mistake. So I understand if you're learning teeterboard and you're going to do a triple backflip, maybe circus school is a good thing to do because you have crash mats, you have a coach, you have safety lines. But for juggling, it's a different thing. And so then it's like, well, why are we there? What are we trying to do? And it's like, if you're the ball bouncer and then we're talking about the club juggler, that's the exact moment of why you're in school, is to get a new perspective, a new idea, to actively connect what you're seeing that's different, that's outside of your habits. It's outside of your traditions. It's outside of yourself, right? And then and you have to actively participate. And that's the one thing I've literally failed at. I think for every sort of, for the most part, in general, I can say I've failed every single year I teach the class, that I can convince these people that they need to be active, and I get it. Like it's so hard. It's so freaking hard. If I'm a Diablo juggler and I'm watching somebody doing foot juggling, that process of connecting what they're doing to what I'm doing, that's freaking hard. Especially since I would have a teacher, for example, who doesn't do either of those things, which is me. Like, I'm the teacher in that moment. I don't do Diablo. I don't do foot juggling. So I can't speak on the technique specifically, right? Like, maybe if you had a Diabloist who did foot juggling, they could give you some sort of technical insight. But since you have to be making that up yourself, I think it's really, in one way, it's difficult. I think for me, the hardest part is just the conviction that it's worthwhile doing, and then you'll find your way. Like, if you're convinced that, like, oh, this is a worthwhile process, then we'll start to find our way together. So I think this whole thing about active reading, active watching, active listening, active living, active conversation, it's about different levels of attention, of what we let enter into our world or into our consciousness. Because we can just have a frivolous conversation with a stranger on the bus, or, and we don't have to actively be processing that or registering it or remembering it. But I think a real key again, I can only speak about juggling. That's my world. So I'll just be authoritative about that. But the real key to juggling is you have to break your habits, get outside of yourself. The best way to do that is just to do active attention or active watching of anything else outside of yourself and connect it to what's inside of you. So I think this active thing is like a key. It's a secret. It's the way of the future. No, I don't know. It's a big deal, man. So yeah. I'm glad you put a word to it, because it really helps me articulate something I'm really passionate about. And I haven't been able to talk about it very clearly. And I'm just discovering all this. So thanks for that.
That's great.
Rant is done. The rant is done.
Maybe we should put the pin in that, and we'll pick up the next bit in the next episode.
Sure.
All right.
I'll rant about something else then.
No. Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
Right. Yeah, it's basically, I think it's for the student is to go, when you're watching this foot juggling act now, Mr. Diablo, they are having a conversation with you about Diablo, but they're doing it through their own expertise of their craft of foot juggling.
I think, yeah,
there's something in there.
I think we all go through the world. We're so preconceived. I mean, Ivar Heckscher talks about this all the time, that we are all we are so preconceived these days about what something should be, about what an experience should be. And so these kids, when they're watching each other, they're like, oh, you're doing Diablo? That's not for me. It's preconceived. Like, that's not for me. And it's the same thing when me and Eric go do the school shows. We're performing for the kids, and 98% of the time, the teachers are in the back on their phones. Oh, this is not for me. It's a show for the kids, and I'm in the room, but it's not for me. And so therefore I don't pay attention. And part of me understands that. I mean, the teachers, I'm sure, are overworked and underpaid and they're exhausted, and I get it. Like I also grab my phone when I just want to mentally check out and not actively pay attention. 110%. That's what the phone is for, right?
Yeah.
So I totally get it if they're like exhausted and overworked and they just want to take a break. That's super cool. But sometimes I'm like, this show's a half hour. You got to be in this room along with the kids. And I think they're on their phone not to take a break sometimes, but because they're bored. And they're bored because they're saying to themselves, oh, this is a kid's show. It's not for me. It's preconceived. And I'm like, isn't it better to watch me and Eric juggle these like crazy, weird, like that Magnet Club duet, Frodo? Like if you're in a room, you're stuck in a library with me and Eric and like 80 screaming kids or whatever, right? And you got to be there for a half hour. Isn't it easier to watch me and Eric do the Magnet Clubs than to just sit there and be bored? But it comes down to this active watching, active listening, being preconceived and saying, oh, this is not for me or this is for me. I don't know. So I love this thing about being active. And I have to say one more thing and then I shut up.
No.
Which is, and again, this is about the kids at the school in general. And this is exactly about being active, which is, the assignment this week was stupid. Oh, we had a task from the school and that task was boring, or that task was stupid, or that task was, I'm not going to do it. Or we have a special workshop this week. I'm not going to go because I went to the first day and it was not for me. And my point is always like this. Look, if you go to school, even if you go to my class and I give you an assignment that quote unquote sucks, it's your fault. Because we should always be actively participating in our own education. You have to take your own personal responsibility for what happens in your life. So if you're like, oh man, I went to circus school for 3 years and mostly it sucked. You know whose fault that is? Yeah, on one level, we can say it's the school's fault for X, Y, and Z reasons, right? But on the other hand, it's kind of your fault because, like, I mean, if you know what I mean. Like, we can, of course, there's different realities to this thing I'm ranting about. But like, in general, my point is, you got to be active in what you're doing with your life. You got to be involved. You have to take some sort of personal responsibility. And if I give you an assignment that you think sucks, add your own layer to it. Add your own point of view. I mean, it's the Seinfeld episode that, is it George that just does the opposite day or whatever, right? We're going to do opposite day today. So like if I'm in class and someone gives me a terrible assignment, I can take my own personal volition and be like, man, the assignment Frodo gave me in mime class today, that was really dumb. I'm going to do the exact opposite. Like you can take your own active participation. And that's another thing I really tried to drill into the students, and I fail every time. This idea of active participation, of like, if you think this experience is going bad, you need to change it. Because here's the thing. This is your life. You are alive right now. This is happening now. It's not a rehearsal. You don't get to do it again. It's not like we're going to do circus school again for 3 years where you get to fix all the things that were bad.
Yeah.
This is it. Like, you're in circus school now. So like, it's not going to get better than this. So that's why I always try to encourage them to actively participate. But it's so hard to communicate that to, I don't know if it's just to younger people or to people in general. It's hard to articulate those ideas.
It's also one other thing that I maybe could help the students get into actively understanding what they're in, is that every situation, every time, every art direction becomes what it is, not through lone genius, but through genius, as Brian Eno talks about. And you are part here of a scene. Even if what you do is to say, I know what one of the expressionists paints a painting, and you go, no, that's not how it is. And then you paint another one in response to them because you think their work didn't go far enough, or it was shallow, or it was whatever. And one of those people who did that, is going to rise above and be the picture that comes in the dictionary when we talk about what expressionism was. It's not always the first one. It's not always the last one. Sometimes, like, it could be any one of those pictures which is in a direct conversation with the people around them. And the way that you juggle in response, positively, negatively, whatever way, or because you're in love with this other guy, or you're in love with, or you hate this, or you do, whatever it is that you do as a response of this microcosmos, this scene that you happen to be caught in at your school for 3 years. Some of these people, you're in this group. So that's one thing. There is your hate, your dislike, your whatever, it is what it is. And you can be floating about on the periphery doing your own thing, whilst mainly you just want to hang out and get drunk afterwards and see if you can get it on with someone, which is an important part of life. But the more actively you take part in your own education, and like Ivar Heckscher talks about on this podcast, where he comes in and he says, I came into the class and nobody was asking any questions. So he talked for the first hour, and then he said, I'm going to come back in tomorrow, and if you don't have questions, I will leave again. And then you are here on your own. But this is about you. If you don't have questions to me or about yourself or about anything, if you just sit here and you're completely empty, then you need to be alone until you have some questions to ask me, because this is about you and your education. It's not just about me telling you what to do. So that was also, I thought, just on a practical thing, the Diabloist who is sitting there watching the foot juggler. The reality of this is, because you're going, this is the furthest away from what I do. I don't do foot juggling, but the fact that, arguably, the Diablo and foot juggling, they are maybe the ones that are most different and most apart from each other, which means you are most likely to be hired in a show together with this person and never with your Diablo friend.
Right.
So whatever relationship is going on with you and the foot juggler in a professional, artistic, developing your craft and whatever, the fact that you guys are going in different directions make you more valuable as a dyad, as two things that could be part of the same show. Because a show won't hire 3 Diablo acts, not even 2.
Right.
Most shows won't even hire 1.
Right.
But if you have a killer act and you are there, then these people will become part of your life and you're part of your ongoing reality. And, more likely it's that you will be there with a handstand person. Most likely you will be booked in the same show. But whoever it is that you can have that conversation with, it's like your craft is your relationship to what you do, your juggling or whatever, but it's also your craft of your life, which you're pointing out so eloquently before. This is the life that you live, and your relationship with these people. And you and me, like, I know how to juggle, and you could do a magic trick. You do magic tricks sometimes, but and I do contortion or whatever, and you are sometimes funny, but the relationship that we have comes through our shared value of performance, of taking part in the craft of circus and creating performances for people. Not because we are the same, but because we are different, we can end up in the same show where you're juggling and I'm doing my contortion act or whatever, and that could fit in the same show. So the people who are the most different from you are often, or at least in the expression of their art. So what you're after is to find that person who does that juggling. Do we understand the craft of circus in a similar way? Can we connect? Because those people who do their arts who are the most different from yours are often the ones you end up being hired together with. So they will. So I don't know if that's a way to look at it too, and go, you need to find a language, which has been what I have been working so hard to do, and what the Way of the Showman is about. How can I talk to the singer? How can I talk to the juggler? And how can I talk to
that's true.
the stand-up?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's true.
And there you go. for as much as it's supposed to be sort of a track on the way of the showman, a track that we follow where we discuss showmanship and play and how they are related. This was just like a springboard. But I always enjoy having conversations with Jay, and in one way or another, it all still comes back to showmanship and play, and there will be another episode coming out in not too long, where me and Jay continue to talk about showmanship and play as the starting point. But we have a couple of other projects too, as I mentioned in the beginning. We are going to do, as he said, it will take several hours to unfold what it is that he loves about Mystère and what has fascinated him for so long, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So there will be a little mini series of that, and then we also hope to start a sort of track that we can use as a kind of trailhead, which will be called Practical Showmanship, where we step away from all these abstract conversations and go into the nitty-gritty of the everyday life of a showman, which we don't sort of talk about quite as much, because those are often things we sort of, you talk to people maybe a little bit more often about those things, and not, I don't know so many people that I can talk to about the more esoteric and intellectual pursuits. But that's also in the works. Practical Showmanship by Jay and Frodo, and ongoing exploration. So lots of new and exciting ideas here on the Way of the Showman. And as always, thank you so much for listening in, tuning in, bi-weekly or weekly. Follow us on wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on Instagram, where I make a little, The Way of the Showman on Instagram, where I make a little introduction to the episodes or whatever. And if there is any interest, maybe I will explore some topics in talking on Reels or something like that. So if you're interested in that, then subscribe, drop me a note, send me an email on thewayoftheshowman@gmail.com. All of these things. They say when you do this, don't make a list of all the sort of stuff, but basically I'm just saying, like, reach out, tell me you listen, tell me you're into it, and I'll reply, and we can get a conversation started. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.